Well, this is the big breaking story. As we've been telling you for the last few hours, there was indication and there was speculation that perhaps a consensus has been arrived. It is now official, the Prime Minister saying that there is a New Delhi declaration. The controversy over how Russia and Ukraine would be represented as part of the declaration, there seems to have been those issues ironed out. We will, of course, have to wait to see what the fine print says. But the story at this hour, there has never been a G20 summit previously where there hasn't been a joint communique, and there is no history that New Delhi will make. There is going to be a joint communique that will be issued at the end of it. We are, of course, going to wait to see the fine print as we hear from the Foreign Minister S. Shankar, but the Prime Minister making it clear, making it official. Let's listen in.
खुशखबरी मिली है हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडॉप्ट किया जाए। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं। इस अवसर पर मैं हमारे मंत्रीगण, शेरपा और सभी अधिकारियों का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं, जिन्होंने अथाक परिश्रम करके इसे सार्थक किया है और इसलिए वे सभी अभिनंदन के अधिकारी हैं।
Well, a huge sigh of relief across the board. There was concern on whether there would finally be a consensus that would emerge, but the Prime Minister now making it official. Of course, kudos to all those who've been working behind the scenes. As we've been telling you, there was a long meeting that went on even last evening. The Sherpas were meeting to try and thrash out versions of the declaration that would ensure that it goes through, and clearly progress has been made overnight and success has now been achieved by way of a joint statement. Fine print, of course, still awaited. But Parikshit, this was the indication that we were getting, especially in the last few hours here, that there has been a breakthrough, that talks have succeeded.
That's right. In fact, in the morning also, when we had spoken to Harshvardhan Shringla, the G20 chief coordinator, he said that nothing is over till it's over, but we have come here with a very positive atmosphere. So there were indications that, yes, there would be consensus on the communique. And India, which had the theme, One Earth, One Life, One Family, that has, in a way, managed to achieve some amount of consensus here at the G20. There were different formulations which were brought to the table, and there was a new formulation brought this morning. There was a new draft in that 38-page G20 communique, and we believe that has finally been agreed upon by all members, including Russia and China. China also, before the summit, had said that they would support India in its presidency, and that is the big news, isn't it? Because if there had been no consensus, if we ended with the chair's summary, we would have been the only country in G20's history not to have a communique. So this is an outcome that we were really not looking for. There were hectic parleys going on till late last night, even this morning, and it seems that after meeting at the leaders' level, there is finally consensus. There may have been some amount of dilution because both Russia and China were not agreeing with the Bali text, and they wanted a dilution of that. But it seems that India has managed to drive home the point that let's not let what's happening in Ukraine actually stop development and progress on other outcomes that we've had at the G20, such as on debt restructuring, on cryptocurrencies, on climate finance, on MDB reforms. So India has been saying there has been major success, major breakthroughs in all these fronts. Yes, Ukraine war is a major issue. In fact, sources telling us here at the media center some time back, we were speaking to some officials in the foreign ministry, and they said that India is dedicated to finding a solution to the Ukraine war. So I guess we appeal to all the foreign leaders that yes, this is a point that we also agree with. We also want to solve the Ukraine war problem and end this crisis that the world is facing. But let's also make sure that the progress in other areas of the G20 do not get derailed. So let's see what the final wording is of that communique. 4 p.m. Subramaniam Jaishankar will be holding a press conference. A big win for Amitabh Kant as well, because he was the G20 Sherpa who had been negotiating the text. In fact, there was a final meeting of Sherpas which took place in Manesar just 2 days ago. And the text was being negotiated and discussed till this morning. So this is the big story coming from here. And we would like to see an outcome, not just on the war, but also what has happened in terms of Zambia, Ghana, Ethiopia, what has happened in terms of climate financing, whether there is an increased commitment there as well. What is the legal framework that we will work with when it comes to cryptocurrencies, and what's the road ahead for MDB reform and financial inclusion? That was a big point here for India when it comes to digital public infrastructure and the India stack.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Parikshit, and I think it would be instructive to go back just 24 hours ago and remind ourselves of what the G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant had to say. And he made it very clear, and I'm sort of paraphrasing what he said, but he did talk about the fact that the New Delhi Declaration would carry weight and would have an impact and would take India's narrative forward. So he certainly yesterday did exude a sense of confidence that there would be a New Delhi Declaration. And when he was asked repeatedly whether Ukraine and Russia would derail the possibility of a joint communique, Mr. Kant had said that, look, we've been very clear through the course of this presidency and through the course of the year that Russia and Ukraine can be discussed in the context of food, energy and economic security, but that cannot color the work and the substantive work that's being done on other areas, including, as you were pointing out, climate finance, multilateral bank reform, and of course some of the other pressing issues that the global economy must contend with today. So that really was a glimmer of hope. And the hope today, just a few minutes ago now, has been consolidated into action, with the Prime Minister announcing that there is, in fact, a New Delhi Declaration. Parikshit.
Shireen, we have two members of the G20 research group. They've been nice enough to speak to us and support us in our programming over the last 2 days with their insights. They track every communique and how it's implemented. The big news coming in, and we saw the Prime Minister thumping the table and cheering, saying that the declaration has been agreed upon. There is consensus on the Delhi Declaration. This is a big move, isn't it? If we had to take the Bali agenda forward, we needed consensus here in Delhi as well.
Yes, absolutely. And it is quite the achievement to do that before the end of the first day of the summit. So I look forward to seeing what is actually in that consensus communique. But of course, it is any agreement is probably good agreement, but let's wait to see it come out.
Do you somehow feel that there would be some sort of dilution of the Bali Declaration? Only then would Russia and China have been on board?
Absolutely. I mean, India had one role at the start of this morning, and that was to make sure that the disagreement over Ukraine doesn't derail all the other important aspects of this statement. And, Russia and China, after Bali, have been ever more assertive in making sure that the language is being diluted. And so that, communique and a declaration has been achieved last minute definitely points to some sort of dilution. But like my colleague said, we'll find out exactly where that is when it comes out.
So what do you think Indian presidency has contributed to the G20, to the G20 progress over the years?
Well, what we have seen is a big push for inclusion of the Global South. We saw this morning the African Union being welcomed to the table, not as a guest, but as a full-fledged member of this club. that is very likely to be the real stamp, the real mark, the real souvenir of this summit when we all leave here on Sunday.
Right. Now, coming to a consensus was important because of all these issues that we were discussing: debt restructuring, cryptocurrencies, digital public infrastructure, financial inclusion, MDB reforms. Which were some of the priority areas here, according to you, which needed immediate attention?
Climate change. Climate change is certainly number one. This is an existential threat that the entire world shares. This requires the highest political attention possible. This is an emergency, and this has been at the top of the agenda for Prime Minister Modi. And after that, certainly the sustainable development goals are high up on this presidency's list.
Right. So, Professor Nair, one more question. Give us a sense. G20 works with consensus. Do you think it was ever as tough to achieve consensus as during this presidency?
Well, this presidency finds itself in the moment of geopolitical crisis, unlike any that has been seen in a very, very long time. I do think that because of the division in the club over the war in Ukraine, it has perhaps been more difficult than ever to find consensus.
All right. Thank you very much, Manas and Professor Nair, for joining us. So clearly, this was the toughest presidency. It happened in the midst of a lot of geopolitical tension due to food insecurity, disruption in supply chains. So really, hats off to our Sherpas, our officials in the Finance Ministry and the Ministry of External Affairs for bringing consensus on the table. Back to you, Shireen.
Well, yes, Parikshit, and speaking of the Sherpa has spoken. In fact, Amitabh Kant tweeting just moments ago saying the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration focuses on strong, sustainable, balanced and inclusive growth, accelerating progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, Green Development Pact for a Sustainable Future, multilateral institutions for the 21st century and reinvigorating multilateralism. So giving us a clear indication of the pillars on which the New Delhi Declaration has been based on. Of course, the fine print is still awaited, but he would be a relieved man. He's been burning the midnight oil quite literally. In fact, meetings in the last few days, negotiations have gone on till 2 in the morning or even later. So Amitabh Kant will be a relieved man today with the New Delhi Declaration being put together and consensus emerging here at the G20 Summit in New Delhi to take that forward. But we will, of course, get more clarity in just a short while from now. But that really is the big breaking story at this hour.
Welcome back to our special broadcast on all the action from the G20 Summit. And my colleague Abhimanyu Sharma is standing with the spokesperson to the President of South Africa on the inclusion of African Union into the G20. Take a look.
I mean, it's a very important development. It's one that we're not only delighted with, but it signals a sort of right step in an appropriate direction with respect to further reforms that we are seeking in various multilateral institutions. As you know, we've advocated quite strongly for the reform of the United Nations Security Council. The BRICS Summit declared itself quite well in that regard. We are advocating for some reforms to take place with respect to global financial institutions and the manner in which development is funded. And we will continue to advocate for those positions. But the inclusion of the African Union to the G20 signals a very positive step in terms of our advocacy towards those reforms.
Africa is not just part of the global south, but also represents a growing demography, a set of developing nations out there, big nations, be it South Africa, Nigeria. What kind of specific aspirations do you feel they are going to represent? Because we also understand several other international groupings like BRICS have also been expanded. So what agendas, what issues do you feel are going to come up more on the global agenda, like strengthening of supply chains or any other big concerns?
Well, a lot of issues are already on the table. We are looking for greater cooperation with respect to mitigating the impact of climate change. We are looking at developed countries seeing through the commitments that they've made in assisting the African continent to mitigate the impact of climate change. We are looking for a greater deal of cooperation with regards to security. As you know, we are still affected by conflicts in various parts of the continent. South Africa is quite involved in ensuring that those conflicts are resolved speedily, so that we can continue to focus the continent on development. And so we are looking at more cooperation in those areas, including ensuring energy security, not only for South Africa, but for the continent. And so those are issues that are already firmly on the table, and we'll continue advocating around those issues and forming partnerships, both at a bilateral as well as at a multilateral level, to ensure that we realize a significant amount of progress in those areas.
A slew of multilateral agreements, a slew of free trade agreements have been signed off late by India. What kind of agreements do you feel can possibly be signed with South Africa or the African Union at large? We are also seeing larger acceptance of the UPI system from India across the world. What kind of future do you envisage for the same?
Well, already there is a lot that defines cooperation between India and South Africa, and it's a growing relationship. We certainly, from the South African perspective, are seeking to grow our trade with India. There are a number of areas where India has made huge advances that we would like to increase cooperation on. For example, your space program, which is growing in strides. We would like to increase cooperation with respect to digitization and other areas of technology. We're already cooperating a great deal in the pharmaceutical area, and would like to grow that. There's cooperation in the automotive industry, which we'll also like to see growing. And so you will see a growing relationship. As India grows and we're seeking to grow our economy, we will grow the various areas of bilateral cooperation.
Here's a quick recap of all the headlines that we're tracking for you today.
इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं।
Breakthrough at the G20 Summit. Prime Minister Modi says all nations have arrived at a consensus on a joint statement. There will be a New Delhi declaration at the end of the G20 Summit. African Union becomes a permanent member of the G20 as the gathering of the world's most powerful leaders kicks off in Delhi. Prime Minister Modi terms the inclusion a milestone and calls for trust and reliance. Bharati Sunil Mittal says the inclusion of African Union in G20 is a defining moment, calls on world leaders for a reset of Africa's debt, also adds that Airtel remains bullish on Africa. That's an exclusive. Prime Minister Modi holds bilateral talks with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Both nations are hoping to advance negotiations for a potential free trade agreement. Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden held a bilateral meeting last night. Both leaders discussed a wide range of topics, including trade, technology, democracy, and securing the Asia-Pacific region. Former Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh and the head of the Telugu Desam Party, Chandrababu Naidu, arrested by the Andhra Pradesh police in a 2-year-old corruption case. Tension grips the state as Naidu supporters take to the streets. An earthquake of 6.8 magnitude jolts Morocco, killing over 600 people. World leaders at the G20 Summit offer support and condolences. With that, it is a wrap on our special broadcast. More news and updates continue right here on CNBC-TV18.